Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today I'd like to carry on with a video a day wherein I talk about a film or a TV series that in one way or another I feel has something to do with the Halloween spirit or tradition. And I realize along the way that all of these films or TV series are ones that, for whatever reason, I have grown very fond of in terms of my own cinematic journey growing up with these particular works, or as the case may be, watching them over the course of many times. This is one of those films, and if I could be even more specific, the film that I wanted to talk about today is one that means so much to me in terms of the feelings as I first saw the film as a kid growing up, and then the various versions that I was able to encounter along the way, and such that I have ever since been a huge fan and admirer of this film. And it's been a film that has always been very close to my heart for many reasons. And it's from 1978, and the filmmaker is the one, the only, George A. Romero. So Mr. George Romero and crew came together and created this one-of-a-kind epic spectacle of a film that has so much thought and care and a lot of commentary and critique embedded within its wonderful spectacle set pieces of horror and gore and action. And it's this film, Dawn of the Dead. This is the very now classic Anchor Bay release that was made many years ago on DVD. It was referred to as the Ultimate Edition. And it was a multi-disc DVD set, and it had so many of the different versions, and also it had a supplements disc, and it had a little comic book as well. So it was packed. And I know that there have been subsequent releases of this film on more modern formats, shall we say, but I've always had a great love for this particular set because it was one of the, and still is one of my most prized possessions in terms of when I first got it and how much I've seen all the versions and the discs ever since, and just how much fun and joy and entertainment that the film through watching this set and through other means has really given me. So this is a set that means a lot to me. So that's why I have it here. As for the film itself, I think it's a film that, as some of you may know, or as many of you I'm sure may know, has received a lot of attention. It has been discussed a lot in critical circles and also in fan circles and the like. And so I cannot add anything new to that already fantastic and blossoming and excellent conversation about this film. But if I can just talk about it in personal terms, as I hinted at the outset of this video, I remember seeing this film, or before that, I just remember reading about the film before I had actually seen the film. And I, like many others, perhaps in my generation, grew up with horror books and film books and horror magazines and the like. And among that reading, when I was a kid, was reading on George Romero and the so-called Dead trilogy. And among those cycle of films was, of course, the film Dawn of the Dead. And unfortunately, though, when I was very young, it was impossible for me to watch Dawn of the Dead. I couldn't find a copy in my local VHS rental store. And I could find copies of Day of the Dead, interestingly enough, but I couldn't find Dawn of the Dead. And when I was a little bit older, maybe 6 or 7 or 8 or so, I was living in the United Kingdom, and during that time, Dawn of the Dead was released on a VHS tape. And I remember seeing it in a store somewhere, I want to say, in Guildford or Woking. But it was one of these stores where they sold VHS tapes of these movies. And there one day was Dawn of the Dead. From there, I saw Dawn of the Dead in this UK VHS tape. I later realized that that tape had the so-called theatrical version of the film, and what is more, that theatrical version, as shown on that tape, was further reduced or edited down due to certain, I would probably say, certain violent content that was excised, taken out from that particular VHS version that I saw again in the UK. And so I remember seeing the film, and I was captivated by it because of its action sequences and its strategy and the characters, of course. But I also remember reading up about the film in all these film books and magazines prior to actually watching the film Dawn of the Dead. And I remember feeling like this seems a little bit off. I don't necessarily see all the violent scenes, the Tom Savini gore, over-the-top set pieces. And then I came to realize later that, yes, indeed, that VHS tape was a further edited down version. And so I was able, a little bit later, to be able to watch the so-called theatrical version with those gore scenes intact. And from there, I think my life changed, and because it was a real spectacle set piece and a marvel to watch. Very gross, very sickening, but that's part of the fun and thrill of films like this. And I must say too that in respect of the violent scenes, I don't want to go into too much detail, of course, but there is also a really interesting, palpable, homemade quality about the film. And so I really appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that it is very epic in scope, and it's telling a very broadly canvas of a story, and yet it feels very homegrown. It feels very local. It feels very much like it was a next door type of thing. And I mean that in wholly 100% positive, complimentary terms, because I think that really helps the way in which I, as a viewer, was able to access the world. Because granted, it's a very fantastic type of situation in terms of the dead coming back to life and this zombie apocalypse. A lot of it, though, is rooted in the real and the earthy and the understandable and the tangible. And that's true, I think, as well, vis-a-vis the way that the film itself was made. And it feels fresh, and it feels homegrown. And I love that feeling, because it also suggests to me that there is a sense of this being possible. I don't know if that makes any sense, but if there's a feeling of this sort of stuff being possible, then in an interesting way, in a very almost roundabout way, that adds to the level of a quote-unquote realism, or the possibility of this may be happening beyond the scope of the film. Again, this helps to fuel the sense of the imagination on the part of the viewer and the ability to access the world. So I think there is a lot to be said, at least as far as my own personal experience with this film goes. And I should say also that the story is epic and also very minute. I love stories that deal with a group of people that have to come together and figure out a kind of strategy of fortification and standby plans, and working out stage by stage different implementations of a particular grand plan. I love these types of films. Another film like Kurosawa's Seven Samurai comes to mind. You know, that film has a lot of strategy and planning and that sort of thing. Dawn of the Dead is filled with a lot of these planning scenes, and then implementing the plan and using the geography and the space of the mall, and it making sense in terms of using the levels and the elevator shafts and also the corridors, and trying to work out exactly how to best manage the space and to take advantage of the particular geography. while trying to implement their plan, which is essentially fortification in this mall. So I love films like this. It shows characters that are thinking, it shows them trying to act under pressure, and also trying to deal with each other and work with each other, which is also part of the appeal of these Dead films from Romero, especially the first three. I must say that part of the horror, of course, comes from the zombie apocalypse threat, which is very much the main threat of the films, I dare say. However, perhaps equally as dangerous is also the way in which the humans, the characters, either are unable to cooperate with each other or are unwilling to cooperate with each other. And I think we see this kind of equation play itself out really forcefully and really quite effectively in Romero's films, and in particular Dawn of the Dead, especially in the way in which Romero is able to set up the characters with such love and care and attention. And once he has set them up, we see them in this world and seeing them have to react and respond and defend themselves. And sometimes they succeed, other times they may or may not succeed, who knows. But therein lies the suspense. And dare I say it, therein lies certain senses of sadness and tragedy, as well as triumph and action. So there's a lot going on here in terms of the human element that is being portrayed by Romero and crew. And that also has to do with the great portrait of characters. We of course have the core four characters here. We have. And they are quite well presented, and I love the dynamic among the group of four, and it's a dynamic that plays itself out vis-a-vis the relationships between men and women, and certain dynamics that emerge due to that, and then also the dynamics between and among men, and the notion of friendships, of trying to fit in, of being part or feeling like one wants to be part of the group, and trying to prove oneself, and that sort of thing. So I love this kind of banter and interplay and chemistry between and among the characters. This is very important. And I should say also that the scope of the film is also guided along really nicely by the music, the sound landscape. And so, as you know, this is made up of, I think, an amalgam of different sorts of musical sources. So we have, and of course it depends on the version that you end up watching, if it's the European version or one of the US versions. But depending on the version that you watch, you'll likely come across, for example, the score sources by Goblin, which is very modern, synthesized bass sounding, very cool, and now very classic and iconic. And then you may run across the so-called library music cues, and these are also very iconic, very, very iconic. I think perhaps best represented by the gonk. And if you haven't heard the gonk, you are really missing out. I strongly suggest that you check out the gonk, the song The Gonk, if you haven't already. It's one of those where you just listen to it, you just want to I don't know, hop or skip or just dance around, because it's so fun, so joyous, and it's so linked to Dawn of the Dead and the exact pulse that Dawn of the Dead seems to achieve in terms of its horror, its suspense, its action, and also its a satire and social commentary. And it's all, I think, best represented by the gonk and the sounds. So, that's another classic aspect of this film. And my goodness, I think I could go on and on. I think there is so much here in terms of depth and the way that the different set pieces come together. Because if you think about it, it's a very complex plot that's, I think, drawn out in stages which are very easy to understand. But there's so much geography that's traversed. There's so many peripheral or secondary characters that we meet, especially in the beginning. And we see all these little images that come back later in a kind of arc or full circle. And so there's a lot happening, but it's amazing how well presented it is and how well understandable it is. And it feels like a real fast-paced epic, which goes from point A to point B to point C, all these points. But when you get to certain points, you can still take your time and take a breath, and we can get a chance to learn more about these characters. So there's so much pace in action, but there's also moments of character development and the quiet moments as well. And I think those are equally as powerful and poignant and important as the faster-paced action scenes. So this is a wonderfully balanced cinematic work, as well as being a character piece, as well as being an action film, as well as being a horror film, as well as being almost a strategic, almost war film in terms of the plan of attack and strategy and defense and those sorts of things, and implementation of the war strategy, the battle plans, etc. It's all here and then some. So a lot to sink one's teeth into, I dare say. And I think, last but not least, I should say that it's a film that, as I hinted at earlier, meant something very close. It meant something very, very dear to me when I was growing up, and just the discovery of the film and the various versions that I was able to encounter. And I should say, too, that I think also it just showed me a way in which I could feel entertained and repulsed and follow the characters, and then suddenly be shocked by certain turns of narrative, and suddenly laugh and become sullen and sad, and realize that there's a lot of potential when it comes to a horror film like this. We can look at it in many different ways, and I learned those lessons through the watching of many of George Romero's works, including this one. And so I learned through this film and through my experiences with this film just how potentially deep and how wide the genre exploration could in fact be, and the potential that it held, and it still holds. And so I have George Romero and company to thank for that, and for letting me learn a couple things or two or more, and also be entertained and scared along the way. So, and I have George Romero and Dawn of the Dead, I think, to thank in large part for allowing me a little bit in terms of that kind of glimpse into the potential and power of cinema. So that all comes from, in my own personal cinematic journey, this film, Dawn of the Dead. So that is a very brief and quite generalized discussion of Dawn of the Dead, I admit. One of these days I do want to talk in greater detail about this film. I really do. As I mentioned before, and I'll say it again, it means so much to me. And I love this film so much that one of these days I'd love to be able to speak more about it in detail, in the specifics. There are a lot of things I do want to say about the strategy, about why the characters did this, why didn't they just do X, Y, and Z instead? When they did this, then what happened here and there? So I have a lot of things I do want to say about this. But maybe we'll save it for another time if you're interested, and we can go from there. But in the meantime, my friends, as far as the October 2020 films are concerned, this is the work, the epic work by George Romero, the great George A. Romero. This is Dawn of the Dead. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I really appreciate it. And cheers.